Anti-ICE protests continue in other parts of the country, it appears, as well. Saw some of that last night. Texas is a place to watch. The governor kind of preemptively deploying his National Guard before things turned violent in Texas. So we have different strategies in different places. Troops deploying to San Antonio ahead of the weekend. The mayor there said that he didn't make a request for the troops, didn't get advance warning. But again, that was the governor's call in Texas. Let's bring Paul Rieckhoff in on this, host of the Independent Americans podcast, our regular guest on all things national security. Good to see you as always. And you have kind of the experience for this, you were deployed as a guardsman, right? Because we've talked about your service in Iraq before, but you've been deployed as a member of the Guard?
Yeah, I've been deployed stateside in the Guard after 9/11.
Yeah.
Here in New York. I've also been deployed to Iraq. And I think it's important for folks to know that that was after 9/11, right? That was a major attack on U.S. soil. It was totally unprecedented. And I think federalizing the National Guard, which is what Trump has done in California, and then sending in active troops is kind of like a break only in case of emergency, like break glass only in case of emergency situation. And doing this, in my view, is really extreme. It's unprecedented and puts our troops in a lot of danger. And unfortunately, I think what will likely be an ongoing plan for Trump to deploy more National Guard troops, more federal troops. It looks like Texas may be next. You're going to have some governors like Newsom who are going to oppose him, which really creates a tough situation. And then you're going to have other red state governors like Abbott, that sounds like maybe Huckabee Sanders, who are going to invite them in. And our troops are being put...
Well, that's normally the way it works with the Guard. Now, you go back and forth with what the mission should be, but it's usually the governors. That's why this was a big deal for Trump. First time to go against a governor, essentially, since LBJ 65, and that was to protect civil rights marchers. So that was a totally different situation. Now, in '92, L.A., the L.A. riots after the Rodney King incident there in L.A., there were troops, and George H.W. Bush sent them in, right? And Glenn Ignacio is a friend of the show, on all the time, was on last night. He was in that group. He was also, similar to you, serving the Guard in '92. Here's part of what he said.
In that time, the Guard was called in, and actually, I believe Marines were called in at the same time. And like I said, the presence was rather significant. It exploded very quickly. So events that we're seeing right now can escalate very quickly and get out of hand and spread across the city. So calling in the Guard and being ahead of the, what you would say, the curve is probably the best thing to do it to keep it squelched so it doesn't get out of control.
Now, the other side of that, of course, is that and people have brought this up, are you escalating just by calling in not only the Guard, but especially the active duty Marines? I was talking to our previous guest about this. You're kind of setting these soldiers up, these Marines up to some degree.
I think that's really important, right? Because in my view, what's happening in California is an escalation. Because the governor said no. The LAPD said no. They said, we've got this. And when you go against that, you're putting our troops in the middle of a political squabble, right? They're in the middle of the most divisive politics of our time, the most divisive issue, immigration of our time. And I ask folks to think, if you're going to send an 18-year-old into that, what people are seeing on their screen right now, it better be absolutely necessary. They need to have totally clear missions. They need to have a clear chain of command. They need to be able to talk to each other. And most importantly, I think, Connell, you need to have the American people behind them, right? When you don't have the American people behind our troops and things go sideways, our troops are caught in some very, very dangerous situations.
This issue, whether it's immigration or crime, or if you combine the two, normally polls well for this president politically. So he thinks, I'm sure, and, there's something to this, that he's in a pretty good spot here politically. This poll that I have, though, on the tablet about the Marines, about the idea of sending active duty Marines to L.A. is a different story it's telling. See that in the middle? 47% disapprove, more disapprove than approved. So when you ask people about the goals, generally speaking, it's more than 50% in favor. But you ask people about how you're carrying it out, they have some questions about this.
I'm encouraged by this because it means that people understand the need to restrain our military, right? Bringing in the Marines is bringing in the hammer. Bringing in the 82nd Airborne is bringing in the hammer. And if you're going to do it, it has to be because it's absolutely necessary and it's a national security priority, and you don't need them somewhere else, right? So by committing our active duty troops, you're breaking that glass, you're putting them in very deep waters, and you're continuing to put them in the middle of these political struggles, which is really a bad place to be. Like, just use LA as an example. Some of these National Guards, some of these Marines, they might be standing across from a family member who's a protester, right? They've got media cameras, they've got all kinds of volatility. I would rather get sent back to Iraq than to get sent into that. Because at least in Iraq, we had an idea who the enemy is. When you're sent to a situation like this, which I don't think is going to go down, it looks like it's going to continue to increase. That's very, very dangerous for our troops and for our military public support, right? You're putting our military in a place where their public support could drop because they're being so politicized.
You mentioned Iraq. Let me make that the last final comment, because we just got word in from the State Department that the United States is reducing our mission in Iraq, a place where you served. Thoughts on that?
I think most Americans probably forgot we had troops in Iraq. So I think that's significant. It's a reminder of how many places we've been deployed. They've been there to kind of be a strategic lily pad, to be a buffer. Trump has said he wants to pull troops back across the globe. I'd be interested to hear how our Middle Eastern allies are going to respond, how other allies around the world will respond. I know the folks will be glad to be coming home. But I hope we're not taking troops out of Iraq and sending them into L.A. That's when things start to feel skewed and feel like you're being too heavy-handed.
Thank you, my friend, as always. We'll see you next week. Paul Rieckhoff with us, Independent Americans Podcast, and more. Now,